Welcome to StrategyTalk, where the authors and editors discuss news and events with a splash of history. Our host today is Dan Masterson. Joining him is Jim Dunnigan, well-known military author and the Dean of Wargaming. Also, joining today's show is columnist and author retired Colonel Austin Bay.
Welcome, Austin and Jim. Israel struck back at Iran over the last couple of weeks. I guess Trump wants to call it the 12-day war, sort of putting a interesting moniker on it to go with, I guess, twice the 6-day war. Whether that'll stick or not, we'll see. Jim, why do you think they struck back at this time?
Well, Israel had been planning an attack like this for a long time. You know, just like the Ukrainian long-range attack in Russia took 18 months, to plan, as the Ukrainians put it. The Israelis had been basically plotting an attack like this for years. They had Mossad operatives, most of them, local Iranians who were hostile to their religious dictatorship. And they had been gathering information, targets. I mean, this is why the attack was so effective, why they could hit, key certain scientists, military leaders. I think the only guy they missed was the head of the Quds force, and he was in transit to where he was supposed to be. So sometimes being late can save your life.
Didn't they pick him up later, though?
I forget. They said they would. They probably have. They don't always publicize their successes. That's another Israeli advantage. Most countries would be ready to boast about any edge they get in espionage or military affairs, but the Israelis are very discreet. Obviously, there's no leaking, as far as we know, about their years of preparations for this attack on Iran. And this pays dividends because it shows the other enemies of Israel that you may be on our preparations as well. They probably are. But now they have to seriously think about it because they saw what happens when that preparations list is acted on. So the Israelis basically revealed something that, maybe they would rather keep quiet. But at the same time, it's scary. I mean, what they did in Iran, recruiting local Iranians. I mean, most enemies of Israel, Iran was the big one. I mean, who's left? Egypt, they have a peace treaty. The Palestinians have no leadership at all. So I guess, they're waiting. I mean, the Israelis probably know who their enemies are. Like I say, they're always studying their allies and neutrals to see who is going to be, problem next. That is their advantage. They take pains. They make preparations. And in this case, they not only had preparations, but they had hundreds of operatives on the ground for years in Iran. I mean, this is not the first time they did it. That thing, 5-6 years ago, where they stole, half a ton of documents from Iran. It was another example of their operations. The Iranians should have known that the Israelis weren't going to rest on their success. I mean, one of the advantages Israel has in Iran is that Iran is run by this religious dictatorship, which is very unpopular and is very stupid because the Ayatollahs believe that God is on their side. All religious leaders believe that, but that their God is infallible, and any problems they encounter are, the result of, how should I put it, misbehaving or incompetent Iranians, and measures must be taken. Plus, the devil Israelis have basically been beyond all the problems inside Iran, and it's not our fault. So, with this mindset, the Israelis were able to basically prepare the ground and make an overnight success of what was, years of preparation.
Austin, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, the Israelis have been preparing for this strike for 20 plus years. I think it was sometime in the mid 1990s that you heard for the first time a line out of Iran that Israel was a one bomb state, meaning because it's small, if they hit it with a warhead of several megatons, it would be effectively destroyed. And they were serious about it. The Iranian Islamic revolutionary regime established by the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini was dead serious about destroying Israel. Israel, of course, was the lesser Satan. The great Satan was the United States. And a nuclear weapon did several things. It gave them the power to threaten Israel, threaten their Arab enemies, and the Iranians look at all the Semites, either Arabs or Jews, as being well beneath them because they're Aryans. It's Aryanistan is what Iran is. So they would have been able to control world oil prices by shutting off the Persian Gulf, and not just shutting it off with the Straits of Hormuz, but being able to paralyze entire Arab cities with a threat of nuclear attack. Now, getting in the way of all this, of course, is the United States and the Israelis. And I will say as well, you don't hear a lot about it, but Turkey and NATO didn't want Iran getting a nuclear weapon. I don't think Russia wanted Iran getting a nuclear weapon because that regime is a totalitarian theocracy, and they really are crazy. Jim was talking about how weak they are in so many ways, given their population is at odds with them. That's true, and they're also very corrupt, which I think is something that gets preyed upon, Preyed, certainly by the Chinese. I think Mossad knows where to put money, and that's one of the reasons they have Iran so thoroughly wired, as they say. But then they also have volunteers. Is my suspicion, but there's enough been said to have volunteers from dissident Iranians that seek to end the Ayatollah regime. But to get back to the quote unquote 12-day war, no, this has been going on since 1979. That's a 46-year war with the United States. And really, once Khomeini toppled the Shah, they're at war with Israel. And the Israelis have been preparing for, in some way, of taking attacks to Iran in self-defense. They didn't do it until the Iranians decided they were going to fire missiles at the Israelis. Of course, the Iranians were called out on this because they were using their proxies, Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis. That was the way they were going to fight Israel, and under a cloak of supposed plausible deniability, even though there was no way to deny it. The Quds Force was setting up the ballistic missiles for the Houthis. In fact, the Quds Force was doing that when the Houthis were launching drone attacks on Saudi Arabia. It was essentially Iranian special forces and special operations conducting the attacks with a veneer of Houthi Shia rebels there in northern Yemen. So the Israelis had all but destroyed Hezbollah. Hamas was well on its way to being eliminated. Sinwar's folly, I think somebody called it this past week, that October 7th, 2023 attack. And then the Houthis really finally got pounded, largely by the U.S. Navy, not solely by the U.S. Navy, for a 6 to 8 week campaign. Jim covered it, I think, very well with several things he wrote about it. But look, go back about a year and a half on one of our strategy talks, I said the way to deal with those Houthis was, bomb the heck out of them with heavy bombers and JDAM, stand off and go in there. But ultimately, we did it the way that the Pentagon concluded was the best way to take care of those targets. So back to Iran, their 3 proxies are two are all but destroyed. One is on the ropes. That's the Houthis. And so Iran is now in the situation. Here's Israel. They'd already launched ballistic missiles, and now the Israelis know there's a time frame with Iran trying to get a nuclear weapon. So they're going to take it
And you need to mention that one of their allies there, Syria, is in complete disarray. I mean,
I should have, but in a couple of emails that we traded, hey, the northern route is open now. They can fly right through Syria over Iraq to get to Tehran. I mean, that's that avenue, right? The fall of the Assad dictatorship, and essentially who's controlling Syria now. Well, I really think it's mostly what Turkey says goes and what Israel says goes in terms of airspace, and the Israelis could fly that attack, which they had, according to several very competent sources, been training for at least 5 or 6 years. Their coordinated long-range strike refueling, flying their F-35s and F-15Es in a flock around a tanker, and for a long distance refueling, conducting the attacks, and getting out. And brilliant operations, several operations. That's why I'm calling operations plural. It wasn't a solo shot. It was a series of very successful air operations, and they had really air supremacy, not just air superiority, but air supremacy over significant portions of Iran.
Yeah, they went after all of the air defenses first and took all of those out as well as they could. And then they were going after the nuclear facilities as best they could, anything that was above the ground. Of course, they didn't have they had some penetrators, but they were limited as far as how far they could penetrate, because they only have the small fighters that they could have that could carry the bombs. So, but I assume they had, because they have people on the ground inside of Iran, Jim, they were able to do bomb damage assessment after all the strikes, right?
Yes, and the United States has radiation detection aircraft. These are C-130s. We've had them for years, and you can fly those near to any place where they're suspicious or you want to do BDA on attacking a nuclear site. And they discovered that, yes, the nuclear facilities had been breached. There was residual radiation at the how should I put it, the explosion exit areas on Fordo Mountain. And the Iranians were saying, oh, no, we still got our stuff down there. Well, yeah, there's stuff down there, but it's entombed. It'd take months to dig through to find anybody, dead bodies and whatever. But the radiation detection aircraft found that, yes, the radiation signatures they received indicated that this was, radioactive material that had been damaged or destroyed. So there are ways to confirm this. I mean, there's no point in putting all that money into the means to take out a buried, so to speak, a deeply entrenched, as it were, nuclear facility if you can't do BDA, battle damage assessment, and confirm that you succeeded. And that aggravates the Iranians a lot. In fact, one of the things that aggravates the Iranians is that they weren't able to take advantage of the chaos, well, not yet anyway, and have it a change of government. Now, this is one area where apparently the Ayatollahs commit most of their talent staying in power, which makes sense. I mean, getting defeated by the hated Israelis, the little Satan. They actually, they basically mustered government employees and what have you to have a demonstration. I think it was 1,000 or 2,000 people, and that was about all they could put together. But they basically just wanted to demonstrate to the to the Iranian people that now is not the time to rebel. There were several other interesting side effects to the attack. The Iranians turned off their internet for a while. I forget how long, but it was long enough for several, how should I put it, non-Israel Iran related intelligence operations to reveal themselves. There was one that was, what the heck was it? I forget, but anyway, a lot of stuff suddenly popped up or went dark, and you could trace it back to the Iranian internet going dark for several hours or whatever it was. So there's no end to the losses they've taken. But the one plus was the Ayatollahs are still in power. Now, how long that's going to last is hard to say. The Israelis have hundreds of operatives, mostly Iranian, pro-Israel Iranians, on the ground. And if they are putting together an uprising and a change of government, they're going to take as much time as they have to do it right. As the old saying goes, if you kill the king, you better make sure he's dead. Otherwise, you are. So, it's not over in Iran. And so over the next few weeks or months, we'll see what the end game really is.
Now, the next thing I'd like to talk about is some of the nonsense that has been brought up about see if I can get this to come up. Some of the nonsense that's come up about, well, are we going to put boots on the ground, or is the Israeli going to put boots on the ground? This is the topographical map of the near Middle East.
Yeah.
And, you can see where the topology of Iran is over there, almost smack in the middle. It's mountains and hills and valleys. And, if you read it all about when Alexander's troops went in there, they had the devil of the time bringing all the warlords under control, if they ever did. Why the British and everybody else had problems in Iran. Nobody's going in there with boots on the ground and bringing it under control.
Well, no, the Ayatollahs would want that, because then they could basically mobilize a lot of Iranian nationalism. The Israelis are taking the right approach. They have sandals on the ground, sneakers on the ground, with those hundreds of operatives. And these mostly are Iranians. Almost all of them are Iranians. And they know what it would take to bring the religious government down. And like I say, that, will roll out when it's time. They have one shot with this, and the retaliation would be devastating. So they basically want to make it work.
Now, Austin, do you think that the Israelis have any plans to maybe they've taken out the first level of leadership there in the army and the nuclear scientists? Do you think that they have plans to take out the second level of leadership now?
Well, in that column I wrote this week about simultaneous strategic bombing strike and operation that had been in the mill in some shape, form, or fashion for 3 decades. I'm talking about from the U.S. side of looking at the attack on Fordo and Natanz, and Isfahan was also hit, as I recall. I said it should have been called, the Israelis needed an 18-day war Trump says you're going to stop shooting, and we're going to get this out, and we're going to go to diplomacy 12 days. But another 6 days, now this is all speculation, Dan, but we saw what the Israelis started doing after they had taken out what nuclear targets they could take out, and what leadership targets they could take out, and what Al-Quds, special ops, ballistic missile depots and that they could take out. Is that another 5 or 6 days would go after some of the other regime maintenance targets, and I listed a few in the column, but they didn't. So I'm already on in print saying, hey, this was a possibility that was not exercised. But as Jim's pointed out, if something reignites, they could come back, and is it going to set a situation that guarantees there's a rebellion? No, doesn't even not a rebellion, much less a successful rebellion against the Iranian dictatorship, because they're very good. The thing they are best at is repressing their own people. And that's the way a lot of dictatorships are. Their first enemy is their own people, and that's the brittleness of dictatorships. But yeah, I think I can see them hitting some of those targets. I don't know that it brings about a successful revolt, even leads to a revolt. But they're there because it's a way to rattle the Ayatollah regime, for sure. Display that the Ayatollah regime cannot protect the Iranian people. And I've heard this said by 4 or 5 other commentators. The nakedness of the regime is revealed. They spend all their money on making war elsewhere on the planet, propping up their proxies and the like, and didn't spend anything on defending the Iranian people. More or less, they're relying on all those mountains you pointed out, and the fact that they've got this high plain in the middle, but it is like they've got a mountain fortress around them. A weak analog, but it's still telling, is Ethiopia. It's tough to get up there where Addis Ababa is, and the Ethiopian empire has more or less persisted since about 1000 BC. I know Ethiopia's been quote unquote taken over, but it wasn't much of a takeover in so many ways. Iran, same thing, even though it's collapsed and there was a successful Arab Muslim attack. Iran is more or less the same Persian Empire or Persian heartland it was in 400, 500 BC. And I guess that's what the Ayatollahs are relying on. Nobody really wants to go in there. Alexander did, but what he did was capture Darius. So, knocking off the Ayatollah, does that knock off the regime? I don't know. But I don't think Trump said he's not going to allow targeting of the Ayatollah. And I think that's a very smart thing on Trump's part. Distinguishes us from them, because the Iranian regime's been trying to kill Trump. And Trump says, no, you get to stay alive. And I think that shows how tough the United States is, actually.
Yeah. So, yeah, one of the things is I had Iranian students in my classroom when I was a full-time computer science instructor back in the Gulf War. And they always identified themselves as Persians, not as Iranians.
Yeah.
So it's sort of interesting.
Yeah, well, that name change was recent. I think it was only in the 1930s, and it was more politics than anything else.
Right.
Not all the Persians went along with it, and obviously they still don't.
Right.
Well, they speak Farsi, and that's what
right.
where you get Persian out of that, but they do consider themselves to be Aryans. Iran, Arianistan, land of the Aryans.
Right.
They're the Aryans.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. That just tickled something in my head that a lot of people, think as the Aryan race. They attach it to Hitler's regime, but there are actually other groups in the world that are still promoting Aryanism. One groups in Iran, groups in India, and then groups up around in Ukraine and like that. So
Yeah.
that's still a mythology that's still being used in other places, and it hasn't gone away. It just doesn't hit our press over here in the United States. So,
Well, a lot of stuff doesn't hit our press. For example, there's a lot. I come across a lot of Christians being, murdered and harassed and whatnot all over the world, and there's nothing in the American media. You have to go to foreign media to find
Right.
out about stuff like this. So, that's why I never owned a TV set. The only newspapers I read, I buy them on Sunday and read everything but the news, and I'm well informed.
right.
Well, look, when I was covering regularly Congo, East Africa, several places, and I did that for, strategy page for 2 decades. Some of the most interesting and ultimately accurate reports came out of both, I'll say, developmental aid, non-governmental organizations, or religious groups, Catholic or Anglican, Protestant, Latter-day Saints, on this, where they're talking about, they're getting reports from many cases, not necessarily missionaries, but developmental aid workers or the like, on what they're seeing, particularly with before the plethora of cell phones and cell phone coverage in these parts of Africa, and I'm talking that they start getting a lot more after 2005. But you get these reports in those sources, and a few of them might appear in Reuters. Ultimately, but Reuters is getting them from them, and also various militia groups and quote unquote the government, and then suddenly maybe 3 weeks later showing up in hospitals and the like, or there's a wave of refugees from these areas that the first trace came out of mostly religious or small non-governmental aid operations. And that's part of what Jim's talking about, how major press, suddenly look at this horror that's going on. Well, it's been going on for quite a while, and you're just now getting a scare headline out of it. I'm not diminishing the pain and suffering. I'm just diminishing what has passed in so many cases, at least by the major media, as our reporting. Well, I know where it came from. It wasn't yours originally. It was out of these small places where people were out there almost on their own. So
let's talk about a report that the major media pushed about the strikes on Iran. There was a report that came out from the DEI from a low-level analyst that said, Iran had only been set back a few months in their nuclear effort. This was
a Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, Dan. Yeah,
but
DIA.
it came out so fast that there had been no time to do any BDA, and one suspects that it was pushed out by an analyst that wanted to do damage to the administration, in my mind. How do you see that, Jim?
Well, that may be part of it, but I think the big part of it is that the mass media, which is in decline, as we've noticed, when the internet came along, suddenly there was real competition, and it was free. The mass media are not really credible media anymore as far as news goes. And, a lot of people in government, I mean, a lot of geeks, a lot of people like us, we just don't take it seriously. Like I say, I don't refer to it at all unless they've done something particularly outrageous or funny, and then I'll check it and I say, well, it's not amusing. They still have some imagination for how to screw things up. That's other than that, getting the news, they don't. I mean, as Austin pointed out with the cell phones and especially the internet. The internet came in the mid '90s, and by the early years of the 21st century, it was all over the place, and this changed everything. And as Austin pointed out, even in the poorest parts of the world, in sub-Saharan Africa, in tribal India, people can afford cell phones because it's not a luxury; it's a necessity. It's made farmers, dirt poor farmers much more prosperous because they can keep track of markets. They can find out the best prices for fertilizers and other supplies. Another thing to realize is don't be misled by the low education standards in parts of India. A lot more people learn how to read at home. In other words, or for example, the Indian educational system is totally corrupted. It has been for a long time. Teaching at the elementary level is a patronage job, which most of them are no-show jobs for some political crony who is just pocketing the money for payment for corrupt services rendered. So the internet has allowed people who are illiterate for one thing, or barely literate, to communicate because you can talk. And of course, a lot of people have learned how to read and write in their local language or in English via the internet. So I mean, it's really the underestimated revolutionary tool in the 21st century, and it's why we get a lot of information, from behind enemy lines. As well, I mean, the Russians, most armies, including the Israelis and the Americans, tried to ban troops from taking, the cell phones with them out in the field on operations, and it just doesn't work. So basically, you have to plan for leakage from your own troops. Now, well-disciplined troops will, if they have cell phones, not misuse them. But in conscript armies or armies where people don't want to be in the military and they are anyway, the cell phones are a definite problem.
Yep. Austin, what did you think about that DEI report?
DIA report? You mean DEI?
Yeah.
I thought I heard you say DEI. No, but
yeah, I get it confused. I'm not.
That's all right. Look, DIA does good work for the most part, but you never hear about it because they're doing good work. I heard at least 2 officials read part of it, and it struck me as, gee, this is gobbledygook. They don't know. They haven't had time for BDA. It's both bomb damage assessment and battle damage assessment. But battle damage assessment seems to be the more popular meaning now, because you got to include missiles, cruise missiles, and the like in it, even though they are flying bombs. But that could not possibly have been done. Jim mentioned, and I'm going to touch on this briefly, sniffer aircraft going over. I think we have drones doing that. What either used to be on special C-130s.
Well, no, they did send. They did. There was a news item of that one. It may be its last mission, but it didn't get involved over Iran. I think they keep it around because it can carry more bulky instruments. I mean, as the instruments get smaller,
no. I know that. Well, we had that RB-57 that we don't have anymore. That was a sniffer aircraft
Yeah.
during the Cold War, But the thing is that to get back to that report, Dan, it struck me as Washington inside baseball, just given what I heard out of it. And then, within 24 hours, well, that's what it was. It was something that was leaked to reporters that had a complete negative slant, but had no information, and even said in the content within it that it was very preliminary. Well, no kidding. It was an uninformed opinion that was produced to get a negative story about that attack. And in other words, I think what Secretary of Defense Hegseth said is he was describing a Washington D.C. game, not a real not a real intelligence assessment. And then since then, you've heard, okay, you can discount the Israelis. I wouldn't discount John Ratcliffe at CIA with what he had to say, because he's putting his reputation on the line, as well as CIA's. And then you even had senior Iranian member of their foreign ministry say that the damage was bad. And then you can look for yourself. And that attack on Fordo was devastating. General Kane's briefing, which I got most of, I wish I'd recorded it. I didn't, wasn't able to do that, but I know there's plenty of clips of it still on the internet, where he goes and describes what the B-2s were doing and how we have the, 1, 2, 3, 4 bombs down the same hole, up to 6, I suppose, going down that main shaft. We've been practicing that, creating the weapons, creating the capabilities and training, definitely since 2010, probably 2009. But I can go back to 1995 and 96, where we were experimenting with using certain types of penetrators to follow one following the other by milliseconds. And the target was Gaddafi's nerve and other chemical weapons stash underneath a mountain in Libya. And we were working on getting that timing down. Now, diplomacy ultimately got that shut down, and then Muammar screwed up and he got killed. That's 2011. But he had special weapons that he was going to use on his enemies, and his enemies could include everybody from Italy to Egypt, because he didn't like Egypt at all. Matter of fact, he told Sadat before Sadat was assassinated that he was a revolutionary regime, and Sadat, the Egyptians attacked him in Eastern Libya. Sadat said had to teach him a lesson. Very limited attack across the border. But the report, back to the report, there was no way. That it struck me that, and I have no evidence for this. This is just a gut feeling that it was prepared by somebody who knew the strike was coming off. As it was coming off, it was prepared in that. And who knows? It could be dead wrong. I told you, just speculation, Dan. But does it need to be investigated? The administration says it is. And whoever pulled it, look, I signed all the forms because I had all the clearances. I never violated it.
Well, some poor junior analyst is going to take the blame.
That may be the case. That's too bad.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap it up there, and we'll talk to you gentlemen next time.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.